Alright, so welcome to our second session of the Windows Phone App Lightning Design Reviews. I'm Lincoln Anderson with 352 Media Group, and we're going to be looking at some apps today and talking about how we can improve the design of them, what's working, what's not, both in terms of the Microsoft design language and also just general design and usability. So let's get started. The first app that we're going to look at today is called The Next Line, and the idea behind this app is that users can collaborate and write the story together. The initial user kind of kicks it off by writing the first line of the story, and then other users can come in and add one line at a time. So the first page that we're going to look at is what's called the menu screen. This is sort of a pivot control. And you can see that there are a list of options. So you can join a story, start a new story, look at settings, and there's an icon for each one. So there's a few things going on the screen. I'm going to break it down step by step and just address some of them. The first one is the use of the background image. Now, a lot of apps do this. You kind of throw in almost like a watermark wallpaper graphic in the background. And this app is doing that pretty well in terms of bringing the opacity down, so it's it's not distracting from the content in the forefront. But at the same time, there are elements on this page that you can see, like down here by help. There's handwritten text in the background, and it just makes it look a little bit cluttered. It's hard to see the text over some other form of text, that sort of thing. So if you can find a way to make your app look unique and add some creativity and design style without resorting to putting an image or texture in the background, try to do that. And I'm going to give you an example of that in a minute. A couple other things going on. The icons are pretty good. They're a good Microsoft design language style in that they're flat, they're very clear, they're vectorized, they're single color. So the whole point of the icons being designed that way is that they're clear. You can identify them right away. There's no question about what they are. At the same time, the operating system and the frameworks come with a set of icons, and you'll usually see them in a circle button. And a lot of these things really already exist in the operating system, like the settings gear. You can see this one's a little bit different, and there's it may not quite be clear what some of the icons are. These are pretty obvious, but when you start making your own icons or importing ones that a third party made, especially if they look just a little bit different from what you could just automatically use from the built-in icons, you might end up confusing users. It gets a little hairy, especially if you're making your own icons, and maybe icons aren't your specialty, because you might make a gear icon like you see here, but it might end up looking more like a flower or something, or a starburst, like a sun or something like that, just because maybe making icons isn't your specialty. So I would just try to use the built-in the Seago icon set if you can. The next screen is going to show you some of the ones. I pulled this from what's available in developing Windows 8 apps. But you can see there's just a ton of stuff. Most of the purposes that I've found I need an icon for, there is something that exists. Or I can take something from here and use it as a starting point to modify and just tweak something a little bit. Maybe take a folder icon and overlay another icon on top of that for saying add folder, or just as an example. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was application flow. I mentioned this last week a little bit. I wanted to give you guys another example. The first screen I just showed you, the title of it was menu, and you can see here this is just a flow chart of the pages in the app that I've seen, that I'm aware of. There might be more in this particular app that I just don't know about, but this is just sort of a flow chart, a sitemap, an overall view of all the pages and how they're related to each other and how you navigate around between them. So if you look at menu, I highlighted that in red because to me that was a red flag to say if you find yourself making a page that you're calling menu, just remember that there is a built-in menu system called the app bar, that little row of icons on the bottom of the screen. And that's generally where users are going to expect all their other apps to put menu options there. That's where they're going to find your app's menu options. If you find yourself making a dashboard type view where you're surfacing interesting pieces of content to the start screen of your app, maybe you're using a panorama or a series of pivot pages to actually show kind of like hot topics or the most popular pieces of content or something like that, that's a little bit different. You could think of it like a menu, but you're actually bringing content to the forefront. If it's really just a menu, a series of icons, that really could work better as icons in the app bar. So this is just my attempt at taking some of those same pages and thinking about them a little bit differently. So here, everything that I would say is a app-wide navigation, a page that I want to be available from anywhere, might be more like a utility or might be more like a command. I would put in this box over to the right, and I would say making a new story, changing settings for the application, altering the notifications and whatnot, a help page, a sign-in command. Those are things that you might want to do from anywhere. You might not want to have to go back to the menu screen in order to access these. So you could put those in the app bar. I made a white outline around the new option because to me that seemed really important. Like, a user's not going to want to click on settings all the time. It's just kind of there when they need it. But making a new story, that might be something that you do almost every time you use the app. So I kind of highlighted that a little bit. And the distinction there is when you go to actually make the app bar, you would make the new option a circle button, and you would make that readily available. But then things like settings or help, those might be extended menu options that are down below when you go to expand the app bar and get more of those text options. So if you're the developer on this app, you might have your own idea of, maybe these aren't organized quite right, or maybe you would shift some things around. But those are just some general things to keep in mind. The side effect of doing this, though, is that your main use case scenario gets really slim. Here you can see it's just really simple. You're seeing a list of stories. Maybe it's top stories or my stories, or you could pivot between those. But then you're just going down to the detail for each one of those stories, and then you can do something with it. So it really just kind of streamlines the interface. And I'm going to show you an example of that in a second as well. Before we get to that, though, I just wanted to talk a little bit about alignment and the grid. So there's a pattern of designing things in Windows Phone apps where everything is left aligned, and all the templates and content just kind of does this automatically, and you can see that this app's doing that pretty well. Everything is left, they call it left, or align left, and ragged right, which means we're not really worried that everything on the right is just kind of jutting out. It's more important that things are aligned on the left, because that's how we read, left to right. So the key there is to make it look really tight and clean and legible is to obey the Windows grid, and in particular that left margin. So here I've put a red line straight down the page so you can see it more clearly, and almost everything on this page is aligned to that, except for that title at the top is shifting over a little bit. And this is a really common problem. It's in part because the templates themselves for these pages and some of the controls, if you just toss them in, the margin doesn't quite add up right to push it over. I think it's 24 pixels from the left. And part of that is to give the developer flexibility to make the control, the hit area on their control, where your finger can tap, a little bit larger than the visual itself. So the key here is just make sure that everything visually lines up on the left there. And again, these are a couple of good resources for putting the grid in part of your workflow. For designers, this first link is a blog post that talks about using the grid in your design comps, and it includes some transparent PNGs and Photoshop files and stuff that you could use. I actually don't know how up to date that is. It's kind of an old article, but the spirit of it is there, and there may be other things out there in the community that people are sharing. The second link is a link to an app. I believe it's called Metro Grid Helper, and this thing is really cool. It actually, you can put it into your project, so when your app is running, there's actually a grid overlaid, and you can see if things are overlapping or sticking out of the grid in a weird way or something. So again, I don't have too much more on this particular app to talk about, but if you just go through some of these pages, you can see how maybe a button is not taking up the full width of the page space. This app, for the most part, looks pretty good now. The last thing I wanted to really say about this app was the use of capitalization of uppercase in the content, and also the margins between items. So if you look at this particular screen, it looks kind of cramped, and it's not particularly easy to just kind of run through and scan everything. The developer has made the titles of the text a little bit, of the stories, a little bit larger and a little bit brighter white, so that helps. But if there was a little bit more space in between each one of the blocks of the story and the original author and the details, that would help to kind of separate it. And a lot of developers aren't comfortable doing that because it introduces scrolling more, earlier than they would like. They'd like to be able to fit more on the screen. But user studies show that with mobile, people are accustomed to not having a lot of space on mobile phones. It's a very small screen. And particularly on Windows Phone, which is known for being pretty fast and fluid, and being able to get around very quickly by just flicking your finger, it's not really something you have to worry about as much. The more important thing is, as you're looking at the screen, can your eye just pick up those visual separations between elements? So I would recommend putting a little extra margin between those. The other topic here was the use of uppercase. So just talking about typography. Typography is a really big deal on the Windows Phone. And when you look at a series of characters that are all the same height, like an uppercase series of letters are, it's harder to read than when there are uppercase and lowercase letters. And the reason for that is that if you look at, let's say, the right side of the page right now, this title that's up that says Right Now page, if you look at the lowercase e and the lowercase p and the lowercase t, there's different heights. There's little bits that hang down, there's little parts that stick up, and your eye recognizes those just from years and years of reading. Your eye picks up those letters really quickly, and so it's easier for you to recognize those letters, recognize the whole word, and just consume the text really quickly. When you make everything the same height with uppercase, you don't get all that rich detail in the type to pick up on. So it's just a little harder to read. So yeah. Not much more to say about this app. Again, I would say just everything that I've said so far, just kind of go through and audit each one of these pages, and I would say, right here we have the title, Your Next Line, and then the text box. There's a big margin in between those. It's as big, or maybe even larger than the gap between the previous section that says Report Spam and this title, Your Next Line. So we use space between groups of items to help the user understand elements that are associated and part of the same group versus elements that are separate. So you want to make sure you're using margins effectively to separate and group like elements and unlike elements. So this is just one idea. I threw a lot of advice at this app, and I just wanted to kind of take little bits and pieces of everything that I talked about and give you an idea of what your app might look like. So, again, you can, if you're the developer on this, you can take pieces of what I'm doing here and incorporate it, or if you are looking at bits and you think, oh, that wouldn't really work, maybe there's another way you can kind of spin it so that it will work. But here I'm using a flat color background, which enables me to take advantage of the user's accent color and their light-dark options. I'm using lowercase text, just so it's a little bit easier to read. I'm using greater variation in the size of the fonts to just create more of a separation between each one of the stories that I'm listing out. I'm using a little graphical element on the bottom. I just combined the pencil icon with, I think it's the address book icon. It's in the Seago icon set, just to add a little visual element. I didn't want to take out the interesting photo that was watermarked in the background of this app and not give an idea of something, how you can make it look kind of unique and fun back in there. So yeah, I hope you find that useful. Oh, and the other thing is, this is just, again, going back to the app flow, the application flow, it really streamlines all of our commands and options being in the app bar, and the add a new story icon just being the central thing that you would want to do. And that really opens up the canvas for just showing content, showing top stories or my latest stories or whatnot. And then, and then the user just doesn't have to dig around as much or navigate around to find what they want. So the second app we're going to look at is called Skinned. The idea behind this app is that you can give it 2 images. Typically this would be a design comp that a designer made for an app, and the other image would be a screenshot of what the developer is working on. What they actually have is a live app, and it will overlay them, and you can adjust the opacity and see where the comp and the actual app are lining up, and where maybe some little tweaks and visual corrections need to be made. So this is a splash screen for Skinned. I just wanted to point this out. I thought this was cool. Even though the Skinned logo doesn't use the Seago font, and even though their logo is not a icon from the Seago icon set, maybe this green isn't an official Windows Phone color, that's fine. They still have the simplicity and the clarity and the use of these geometric shapes to represent a concept very simply, overlaying 2 images. I just thought it was unique, but it also fits in with the feeling of Windows Phone pretty well. Windows Phone is inspired by this, what's called international typographic style. And you may have also heard this as like Swiss style, and you may have noticed some similarities between how Windows Phone apps look and how things look, at IKEA or something like that. It's a whole kind of genre or family of design patterns that are really popular and have a rich history. I just wanted to, let's see if I can Alt-Tab over here without breaking the webinar. I just wanted to show you this is just a Bing image search for international typographic style, and you can see how there's a high emphasis on text, and just using flat color and using weights in text and geometric shapes and boldness. There's a lot of themes. These are images from all over the web, but there's a lot of themes that are running through them. And so this app, Skinned, and the next one we're going to look at, do a good job of doing things that aren't just limited to what are the control styles and things that are built into the Windows Phone framework, but they still adhere to the spirit that's behind the decisions that have been made. So I would highly recommend checking out some of these styles. If you feel like your app is a little bit drab or something, and you want to do something a little bit different, but you're not sure what would fit, check out some of these types of images for inspiration. So this is, I guess, the main screen in Skinned, where you're actually supplying the images. You're saying compare image A to image B. And for the most part, talking about the grid and whatnot, this is a pretty good setup. I would just recommend, as we progress down the line here, this screen gets a little bit busy, gets a little bit cluttered, and also these titles are not too informative, saying image 3A, image 3B, image 2A, image 2B. They're really, it's kind of obvious, like if there's or maybe there's a different way to present having 2 images side by side and saying these are a pair. Maybe we don't necessarily need to label each one of them. I know these are all images. I may not just need to see the word image there every time. So if there was a way, I don't know if pair is a good word or something, overlay or something to represent, a pair of images are together, they're one unit. I think that might, and then you could kind of decrease some of the labeling and whatnot. I think that would help kind of declutter it as you get more and more content in here. The other thing I would consider is, if you do that, if you have each one of these pairs represented that way, moving the upload functionality to a detail page. So really this listing would be, you have pairs of images and you can have a command to add a new one, but then if you want to overlay them, if you want to swap out one of the images or remove one of them, then you would tap on that pair and then go into a detail page. But you could kind of draw up your application flow and consider different ways of doing that. So this is, I guess this is kind of the central interface for this app, is actually overlaying one image on top of the other and using opacity to determine where they line up or where they don't. So I think, I don't know if I got a description from this from the developer, but I'm going to kind of see if I can guess how this works. I think that on the first screen, the instructions are telling me if I slide my finger up and down on the screen, that adjusts one image opacity, or if I slide it left and right, it adjusts the other image's opacity. So I think that's kind of, clear. I was a little confused, though, and I'll tell you why. In the previous screenshot, there were these almost Seago style icons of the uploader graphic, which there is actually an icon for that upload. It's a little line with an arrow already in Windows Phone. You might want to use that. But here it's a button, whereas here I might think that just tapping those arrows is what I'm supposed to do. I might just think that those are buttons too, because they look very similar to the thing that I was just looking at that was a button. So, but maybe as soon as you touch the screen, something happens. I don't know. What I've done for some applications that have a very unique interaction pattern, like sliding your finger around on a two-dimensional axis like that, is actually include a little animation of like a hand or finger sliding around like that. I mean, we don't like to have to explain like how to use things to the user, but when it is kind of an innovative way of using the screen and not something that maybe is has been done before or is built in, visually explaining it may be a good option. The only other thing about this screen that I was questioning was along the bottom there are a few icons. I think it's to turn visibility of one image on or off and the other image on or off, or turn rulers on and off. And I wasn't sure if those were intended to be in the actual app bar. And if they aren't, I would recommend putting them in there for two reasons. One, if you have an app bar in your application and that was to actually roll out over these icons, it would be kind of confusing. You'd have like two app bars going on. And the other reason is that the app bar, it can collapse down to a very thin strip. If you're worried about it taking up real estate, it doesn't always have to be visible with the full circle buttons and everything. So other than that, pretty cool app idea. I don't have too much else other than make an application flow for this and consider if these pages like options, do all of these need to be in a pivot view, or maybe they could be options in your app bar, where users might expect, they might expect that the help or about is down there in the app bar, ready when they need it, and they wouldn't have to hunt around for it in the navigation flow. As far as like left alignment and the grid goes, I think this app is doing pretty well. Third app we're going to look at is called Bucket Listr. The idea behind this app is that you can put a goal for yourself, something that you want to achieve in your lifetime or in the next year or whatnot, and it'll kind of give you a timer, a countdown, and you can kind of keep track of your progress and show how you are progressing in achieving your goal. So the splash page, again, I was saying that these two apps are pretty good at doing something unique. They're using their own typeface, but it still has that same spirit of simplicity and using geometric shapes to represent information and whatnot. So pretty cool. The developer had mentioned on here that they wanted to have an animated splash screen, and I didn't know if they meant once the app starts up that they would do that, or I wasn't sure. So I just wanted to take an opportunity to talk about splash screens. So here's an MSDN link. These are all really easy to find. I'm putting the links up here, as shortened URLs, if you find that helpful. But you can just search for it on MSDN, and I'll tab over to that link right now. So it's a pretty good guide, and they talk about how for your splash screen you should use a flat JPEG, and for different resolutions what the image sizes are that you should use. So typically, a lot of apps don't really need a splash screen because they just load up so quickly, but you can you can make one anyway if yours has to take a few seconds to actually load up. And they kind of mention that right here. Because phone apps load quickly, you should use a splash screen only if your app is unusually slow to load. If you wanted to do a visual effect once the app is actually up and running, that's a different story, and that's your call. So yeah, this is a app that uses the design patterns of like a pivot, and it uses the idea of having these options along the top, and you can see what's selected, in this case timer, and then the other options are kind of dimmed out. You could tap over to them, but it's not a typical pivot. Like the template would have a different font size for each one of the options, and it would be using Seago Light instead of Seago Semi-Bold or whatever this is. But I personally think that that's fine. It maintains enough of the original design patterns that it's not going to be confusing for users. It's not a huge departure. It's just that the designer has decided to do something else to make other parts of the interface kind of take center stage, like this timer here. So I guess you can supply what your age, and it'll tell you like when you're going to die. I'm not really sure, but so this is kind of gives you the whole countdown of your life. And then this one, this developer has a good sense of humor. So this screen shows you all of your individual goals and the time countdown on each one of those according to how you put the due date in, and also a progress bar. So this is really cool. I like how everything is represented again with those geometric shapes. I would have a couple of questions about this. One is the progress bars. They're pretty fat, so they look almost like toggle buttons. Especially since this design is very customized, I might think that's what a toggle button looks like in this app. It's like a switch that I would just swipe left and right. Typically, the progress bars you're going to see on the phone are longer and thinner, and they're clearly not an interaction control. It's really just a line that's filling up. So I would consider making those progress bars maybe take the full span of the page and making them a little bit thinner. I would also consider the title of each one of these sections, just to make it easier for you to scan down. You might have 20 goals, and you want to be able to scan down this page and identify things very quickly. I might consider making the details like the due date and the progress a little bit smaller text, and the name of the dream itself a little bit bigger, so it's more like a title for that area. And in that case, you wouldn't even need to say "My dream is too." You could just use the dream as the title and then have details underneath it. I would also, I'm not sure if there's a significance to the color of the timers, but if there isn't, some ideas could be the color of it becomes more red, or like more urgent as the time ticks down, or maybe color is used as a category or something like that, or to show your progress. Maybe that's what it is. But it just wasn't clear to me immediately. So yeah, this is talking about grouping and separation. This screen is pretty good, but there's a horizontal line between every single piece of content. So it has the side effect of making the page look a little bit busy. It almost looks like there's 20 things going on. In reality, there's only like 5. So I would recommend the lines between the labels and the content themselves, actually eliminating those, and just, that would help to group the label and the data, label data. And you may not even need those lines at all once you do that. You might find that, again, increasing the margin between each one of those sections and then decreasing the margin between the label and the text, it looks good even without any of these horizontal lines. Something to think about. So that's it for today's session. The last week's session is available on the website right now. You can watch it. It's a little embedded video, and we'll get this one up as soon as possible. The next session is going to be in January, so you want to make sure that you submit your app prior to the Tuesday before then. So you have a little bit of extra time to actually submit your app this time, but that prior Tuesday will be the cutoff date. So thank you very much, and I will see you later.